Hey guys, so there were a number of things that I wanted to talk about today. The first of which is an unfortunate phenomenon, I guess, that a lot of the next generation, the young people, and unfortunately it's not just the young people, and it's also not all of the young people. I'm not saying it's like all Gen Z people. There's some really smart Gen Z people that I'm somewhat in touch with, and unfortunately there's some, I would argue, less intelligent millennials and some from the older generations as well. But more so today, more people are getting a lot of their news and their worldviews not by legitimate sources or by looking at how things are, but unfortunately by influencers on the internet. Whether it's, I'm sorry, but Russell Brand or whoever else, right? And so I think that is an indictment of this free market capitalist aspect of political commentary where you don't become more successful than other people by being more accurate or more nuanced or well thought out. And in fact, it's often the case that it's the opposite. The more inflammatory you are, the more views you get, and the more money you make. Maybe sometimes the more hyperbolic you are. And ironically, I think from what I've heard, this person, Hasan Piker, is like not a fan of pure capitalism, but ironically, he used the worst parts of it to become rich and somewhat internet famous. And I think he's kind of self-aware about this, but I guess that is what it is. It would be nice if we did have a system where the most truthful and the most accurate public intellectuals or academics had more attention and reach and recognition. Like, the better you are actually, the more money you make and the more reach you have, as opposed to the opposite. All right, having said that, this person brought up Taiwan, so obviously I'm going to talk about it. And it's often the case that this specific certain sort of set of online influencers, it's often the case that the truth is the opposite of what they're perceiving, and turned out to be the case here too. So let's take a look at what he said. I already know it's going to give me a number of headaches, but we'll try to react to it in real time.
Regardless, but was still laying claim to the entirety of America and maybe even fucking Canada, okay? And then all of America's enemies around the world.
Yeah, so this is another aspect of, the ROC PRC conflict that most people don't know. So people like to say, oh, well, Taiwan actually still claims all of China and more. Number one, they don't know about the constitutional amendments that we've made. So that's something that they need to look up. Number two, they need to realize that this claim over China was because they originated in China. They were the legitimate establishment government of China. We've made constitutional amendments since then, but also that constitution was carried over from mainland China to Taiwan. When this constitution was written, Taiwan wasn't a part of any China. It was colonized by Japan. People also need to realize that the intentions of governments and their people are not always the same thing as what's on paper. What's on paper in black and white isn't always caught up with the people of that country or even the government. And to which people like him will probably go, well, why don't you guys just change it? We've made constitutional amendments, number one, but number two, people like him won't realize that the main obstacle to changing it completely is not us, and it's not because we don't want to. It's the PRC. The PRC wants us to keep that claim that we are China so that they could trap us. So it's like we're saying, look, we don't want to be the one and only China. You be China, we just be Taiwan. So essentially saying, like, writing that in our, making that complete change in our constitution. The PRC has said if we did that, they would invade us. So it's not because we want to maintain these claims and that we're still wanting to fight the PRC for these claims and that we want to invade mainland China and retake the mainland. It's the PRC that wants us to keep that in our claim. They want us to keep that in our constitution. They have threatened us, saying that if we change that in our constitution, that they would invade. People like him don't know this.
Okay? And then all of America's enemies around the world were saying, no, that's actually the real America. Texas is the real America. And then inevitably, they were like, all right, never mind. We're reversing that. The Union is the real America. Texas is not the real America. But we're still going to keep giving Texas as many weapons as possible so they can maintain the Confederacy as like a stronghold against.
But the United States will and should continue to provide defensive weapons for Taiwan. But the level of assistance should be directly related to the offensive threat. That is what the Shanghai II communique, which settled, at least temporarily, this burning issue a few months ago, provides. On the Chinese side, looking at Peking, it is important then, if they want the level of arms to Taiwan reduced, they must reduce the threat. And the United States should continue to insist, as we did in the Shanghai Communique in 1972, and this also is the line in all other statements between the two countries, that the issue between Peking and Taipei be settled peacefully.
Do you think there's a danger that a Democratic or a liberal Republican president would withdraw our support from Taiwan, and what would the impact of that be?
Well, there is the danger, but it would be a very great mistake. Because if we in effect say to Peking, look here, we're withdrawing all our support, we're breaking our economic relations, which is what we really have at the present time, primarily, and whatever military support that we're giving, it would simply encourage Peking to move on Taiwan, to move on it, recognizing that they would have no problem as far as we're concerned. No, that's not the thing to do. I don't think it's going to happen for that reason, even though some might be tempted to do it.
So, I don't know if I have to repeat this again. I probably don't, but keeping in mind that he got the analogy flipped, people, again, it's like people that think like him, they forget that both sides wanted to invade each other and annex like all of America or all of China. But people like him are painting it as purposely or maybe like ignorantly ignoring everything else, but they're focusing on only one aspect of it. Why isn't he talking about the fact that in his own analogy that the Union wants to invade and destroy the Confederates, even though that analogy is flipped? It's backwards. But because of his ideology, he only wants to look at like one aspect of it, conveniently. The people of Taiwan today have no interest in retaking the mainland. We're essentially like Palestine without Hamas, except we're dealing with a Hamas, which is like the PRC Red China, that wants to impose their rule and subjugation against us. Except Hamas actually won some kind of election. I understand that it was a legislative election and not a presidential election, but they won some kind of election. Whereas the PRC Red China wants to impose their rule and that subjugation against us, despite never having ruled us ever in any century, decade, year, month, week, day, hour, minute, or second in history, against the consent and will of the people. They don't want to do it through an election like Hamas did. So in that sense, the PRC Red China is worse than Hamas.
Union America, the United States of America, and constantly have that as a cudgel, constantly have that as like wield.
See, he would like to think that this is true, but in fact, he's not realizing like how much the United States has like basically threw the ROC and the Taiwanese people, even Taiwanese people that don't like the ROC, under the bus. Because of his ideology, it's like he's conveniently covering his eye on all of these things that are inconvenient to his ideology and trying to broadcast what he wants to conveniently, broadcast and only focus on it. The United States, sort of not officially, but behind closed doors, I think Kissinger was part of this because he had some investments in mainland China. Behind closed doors, they didn't write this on black and white, but he sort of like told them behind closed doors. I think this was revealed in a later article that he said that he assured the PRC that the United States would not support a two-China policy, which would be basically saying, the communists get the land that they got, the nationalists get what they got. And then no war. or a one China, one Taiwan policy, which is essentially you want to be the only country in the world that has the word China in their name. You want to be the one and only China. And the Republic of China, they changed their name to Republic of Taiwan. No war. Henry Kissinger, and he told later presidents and I think Secretary of States to follow that line. Those are the two exact legal pathways to peace. And it's sort of like there's sort of like this thing in the American establishment where you have to like Kissinger. You have to like praise Kissinger. He was like this great diplomat. But just ask the Taiwanese people what they think of Kissinger. And there, I think, from what I've heard, there's a number of reasons why you should, a lot of people are upset at Kissinger. People that think like him, they ignore the people on the ground, the people that are the biggest stakeholders in this conflict, and if there was a war. People like this ignore consent and the will of the people. And I'm sure he and people like him don't realize how pro-PRC the United States has been. In order to maintain a peace, the weapons that the United States has sold and made a profit on to the ROC, on paper, the Taiwan Relations Act, it says that the United States has to sell weapons to Taiwan of a defensive character, meaning that the United States didn't sell weapons to Taiwan or the ROC that would allow them to retake the mainland. And there's some resentment amongst the KMT Chinese nationalist type in Taiwan today against the United States because of that. But people like him, Hasan, won't talk about that, or they're conveniently leaving it out. And I bet like people in his circle, they don't realize that the United States position on this conflict is, I would ask people like in his camp, out of the three parties that are involved in this conflict, PRC Red China, ROC Taiwan, and the United States, out of these three parties, which one supports the status quo the most? Which one out of these three parties likes and favors the status quo the most? And I'll even let you guys guess. Who do you think out of these three parties, who favors the status quo the most? We can start with Taiwan or the ROC. Taiwan and the ROC, they tolerate the status quo because it means that they remain independent. They don't get the respect, even though we have proven to the world, for people who are aware, that we give our own people political rights, civil liberties, internet freedoms. We're the freest country in Asia, we're the most democratic country in Asia, but at least we remain independent. The PRC doesn't like the status quo because we are not under their control. But they have been trying to unilaterally, and the key word here is unilaterally, against the will and consent of the people in Taiwan, trying to change that status quo through force and coercion and intimidation. The United States likes the status quo and wants to keep the status quo the most because they don't really care whether or not the ROC or Taiwan gets international recognition. That's not their priority. That's not a priority for the United States. The dignity and respect is not on the United States. The Taiwanese people are losing that respect and dignity, not the Americans. So the Americans care less. I think that, there are Americans that support us having that if it's more possible, if the PRC would respect that they have never governed us before, but they don't. So the United States position is that they oppose a unilateral change of the status quo from both sides. That sounds neutral until you look at what the unilateral change to the status quo both sides wants to take. The unilateral change that a fraction of Taiwanese people or a faction of Taiwanese society wants to make are the people who either don't like the ROC, the Republic of China on Taiwan, and they want to change the name of their country from the Republic of China to the Republic of Taiwan. They don't like the flag, so they want to change the flag and maybe write up a new constitution, which obviously there's nothing wrong with that. It's their own country, and they should get to decide what they want to do with their own country. It would kind of be like if, a group of African Americans and Japanese Americans during the internment camps, and the Native Americans who were genocided, and the Chinese Americans who built the railroads came together and said, we don't like the United States government or flag and constitution. We want to write up a new one, so to speak. The unilateral change that the PRC Red China wants to make is to force their rule over a land that they've never governed in any century, decade, year, month, week, day, hour, minute, or second in history over a people who do not give their consent. So the United States is actually pro-PRC in saying that they oppose the Taiwanese people unilaterally declaring what they want to change about their own country in order to appease the PRC Red China. But people like him don't realize that. They don't know how appeasing the United States has been.
The existence of the Confederate States, or the existence of Texas as a Confederate state, to the existence of the United States of America.
Honestly, it's so ignorant. It's like, I don't know if it's more ignorance or disrespect. It's obviously disrespectful to the facts, the history, and the people and the country. But he has his ideology that he sort of like clings onto, and he tries to fit everything and revision everything in order to cram and fit into that ideological box, even if it doesn't fit, even if the facts don't fit. And it's kind of funny because the Confederacy, the American South, the Confederates, the Confederacy, their Southern accent is very much like the mainland Chinese accent, or the mainland Chinese accent is very much like the American Southern accent. And I actually like the Southern accent, but I found that to be kind of a coincidence, because that's the actual analogy, is if the Confederacy won the American Civil War, is what happened with the Chinese Civil War. What's just so disrespectful about people like this is they are prioritizing their ideology over real people. He's not respecting consent, and I hope he does respect consent with the real people around him. But this is kind of worse in that he's not respecting consent of millions of people. Taiwan right now is the freest country in Asia. We would like to, if there had to be only one China, it should be, if you had a gun pointed to your head, if there had to only be one China, if one government, either Beijing or Taipei, had to take over both sides, it should be the government that has proven that they can give their own citizens political rights, civil rights, civil liberties, internet freedoms, and all of these things. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if the rest of China, mainland China, could have all of the rights and freedoms that they do in Taiwan? Why doesn't people like him want that for everybody in China? And why is he so cavalier about the Taiwanese people losing those rights? Well, people like him enjoy all the rights and freedoms of being an American in America, and the Taiwanese live a somewhat similar lifestyle in Taiwan. We just want to maintain that, but he's not respecting that, and he's rooting for the side that doesn't have all those rights and freedoms to take away our rights and freedoms, while he's sitting comfortably in his studio with all those rights and freedoms as an American living in America. So I would just ask him and people like him, people in his circle and his fan base, it's really unfortunate that a lot of people today are getting their news and worldviews from just honestly random online influencers that really don't know what he's talking about. And he's kind of already known as a bit of a joke amongst people who do know what they're talking about, amongst academics. Every once in a while a clip of his like this one will show up on Twitter, and then academics will react to it what in the world is this guy saying? But I would just ask him and people like him to have a bit of humility and not talk about other people's conflicts that you don't understand. But the Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese government isn't even interested in retaking the mainland. Remember, both sides, at one point, it wasn't he likes to talk and act like only one side, only our side wanted to, retake the mainland and conquer all of China. It's no, both sides wanted to invade and conquer both sides and take over all of China. But he's only pointing to one side in order to fit his worldview. Today, the Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese government aren't interested in unilaterally enforcing their rule over the mainland. Today, we just want to be left alone. That's all we want. That's all we're trying to do. And preserve the rights and freedoms that we enjoy, that he is enjoying as an American living in America. So I would just ask him and people like him to just respect that. All right, next time I'm gonna wear headphones because I was a little distracted about what was going on outside and like some of the noises. So sorry about that, but yeah, I mean, I'm gonna leave it here for today. Thanks for watching, and I hope you're all doing well. All right, peace.